Thank you, Ramarjan College, the Teaching Learning Center and Department of History, and especially my colleagues there for inviting me to deliver this lecture. And it's always a pleasure to interact with the colleagues who are doing refresher course. Though we are not competent to share our research with the fellow colleagues, but it's always good if we share our findings with each other so that the history per se develops. And in that sense, when Umesh and Vikas contacted me that it will be better if I speak on something on environment, I gladly accepted because it's a platform from where we can work on this theme. Before moving further into the details of my presentation, I have two submissions to make. One, it's our endeavor to propagate environmental history, to request the colleagues who are teaching, who are supervising research, to include environment as a consideration in their historical investigation. And in what ways nature has been incorporated by historians, I will be showcasing them with few case studies. The case studies are selective ones, that's my own choice. But there are other scholars whom I may not be able to mention in this brief lecture, so they should excuse me. Their work is as seminal as the others whom I will be sharing. So it's a selective simply because for my own convenience, I have selected few scholars, but the others are equally valid. And any scholar or any fellow participant who is interested in knowing the more details, I will be sharing my email ID at the end, and we can always share that. Before moving further, once again, let me also say that Mahesh Rajan and K. Shivarakrishnan has edited a couple of volumes on that. Meena Bhargava has also brought up another volume on environmental history. So there are several collections in the recent past which deals with the recent trends, recent changes in the environmental history. So my submission will be, I will be focusing on few important themes and important works, which in my opinion are relevant for this kind of presentation which I am making, but others are also valid. To begin with, let me first of all insist that, or let me first of all share my concern that when we say environmental history, often students whom we teach, they get confused that we are discussing the environment, history of environment. No, we are not dealing with the history of environment. Our primary concern is, our primary focus is on the history of the period for which humans have existed. There is a long history of environment when humans were not in existence. For example, when the dinosaurs became extinct or they disappeared from the earth, at that moment of time, humans were not even in existence. So environment has a much longer history. And as a historian, we are not competent to deal with that. Moreover, as a historians, we are primarily focused or concerned about the human-nature interactions. So wherever human exists, we deal with that. So we need to be very careful that we are not dealing with the history of environment. But at the same time, the recent research, when discussed in terms of Anthropocene, we tend to realize that we are also dealing with the history of environment. That history of environment in conjunction with, in association with the humans that we are trying to discuss. So the broad outline of environmental history is primarily that area where humans are in existence and their interaction with the nature is being documented or is being examined by the historians. So in another way, if I can say, it's coterminous with the existence of the humans. This is important in other manner also. There are geological studies, and Anthropocene as a term is being contested because it's not a geological term. It's given by the historians or social scientists. In what ways humans' activities are modifying the geological time scale. It is still to be accepted. But it is proposed by historians, and we are insisting on that, how to incorporate a geological change perhaps caused by the humans. So we'll be discussing that at the end, because my primary focus will remain solely on the early modern and the ancient period, because for modern period there are other considerations, and which will go into details when the appropriate moment comes. The other thing which I would like to stress that environmental history is interdisciplinary by definition. It cannot be termed as pure history. In a way, history, when the social historians, the economic historians, they have been borrowing from other disciplines. But the character of environmental history is much more wider, much more wider. We deal with the history, we deal with the archaeology, we have to deal with the life sciences. Climate sciences have become very important for us, and along with that, even the paleo sciences. So when we discuss the environmental history, we need to be open to other fields of investigations also, because insights from those fields help us in our understanding of our culture. If I give you one example, perhaps then I will be able to convey what I'm trying to say. Not only is the climatic change or climate variability, but there's another issue which it's my personal experience. As a historian of Rajasthan, we regularly use a text called Dhola Marura Duha. It's a love poem between two wives of one prince. The two wives, one belongs to the Malwa, which is modern day Madhya Pradesh, and another belongs to the Maru, that is modern day Jodhpur region. And there's in exchange of beauty of their own regions. In that process, Maru, the lady from the Marwar, says that the teeth of my area and the teeth of people of my area is very bright. And I used to write that this is the description, this is how they identify themselves. Much later, one of the scholars from the MA student from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences was working with me. No, not Social Sciences. Terry was working with me, and when we were working on the Mirta region, and she went for a field trip to Mirta. While conducting field trip, she realized that the water supply to the Mirta comes from outside, and she tried to investigate that why it is happening. So she came to know that this area, the groundwater, has excessive fluoride. Because of the excessive fluoride, the water is not potable. So they bring water from outside to the Mirta city. Then we realize, because of the fluoride, the teeth, as referred by the Maruni in the 15th, 16th century, are white. So the glimpse from some other discipline helped us to understand what she was trying to say. The brightness of the teeth is perhaps because of the greater amount of fluoride in the water in that area. So in that sense, we move across various disciplines. Archaeology is very important for us. Even in my lecture, you will come to know that why archaeology, time and again, will be referred into that in that sense. You all are aware of the way Harappan climatic scenario has been reconstructed, and archaeology has played very, very important role in that. When I come to life sciences, we'll be discussing the history of flora and fauna. In what ways flora and fauna of that region helps us to reconstruct the past. Especially the Zimmerman's work. We'll be citing that, discussing that in detail later on also. Climate sciences. The El Nino and La Nina effect, which has now become a very popular word in the during the monsoons. That because of the La Nina, the monsoon will be good. Because of El Nino, monsoon will be weak. So it's a climatic science which is helping us to understand. Professor Ranabir Chakravarti has done a very interesting work. He has used the nilometers available for the Egyptian civilization, and examining evidences from that, he has tried to reconstruct the character of monsoon for Indian scenario. Let me elaborate that, in what ways that is helping us. Nanometer is a kind of scale usually put in the, or was erected in on the bank of river Nile, and the annual rain was measured. Okay, this is the height this year, this is the height this year, this is the height this year, or it's a low, it's a high flood. So the amount of water flowing in a particular season was usually recorded in the nanometer. What he tried to do, these nanometers give us the year, the chronology of in which year the water was good, in which year water was less, and he is trying to reconstruct, compare that with the evidences from Indian subcontinent, and he is more or less arguing that it corroborates with the nanometer. If there is a good flood, we have received good monsoon. If there is a bad flood, we have received a bad monsoon. But let me caution you all. when it comes to India, we need to be very, very careful, because India is very, very diverse country, very, very diverse country in terms of its geographical features, in terms of the topography, in terms of its vegetation. So the generalization is at the cost of negating the fluctuations within the system of monsoon over the large Indian subcontinent. It may rain in Deccan Plateau, it may not rain in Rajasthan, it may rain in Bengal, it may not rain in Gujarat. So we need to discount that while going for this generalization. But generally what we have understood, that there is a corroborative evidence from the nilometer and the character of monsoon in India. So in this way, we have been trying to examine that. Paleosciences, when I use the term paleosciences, those who have studied Harappan civilization are must be well aware that in what ways pollen studies have been useful in reconstructing the past scenario. In the same way, the dendrochronology, the width of the tree rings, which is annual tree rings, are examined to understand the climatic conditions. We'll be referring Laduri later on also, because he has done a very interesting work. We'll be coming to that. But the paleosciences is also helping us to revisit the historical understanding. Excuse me. To further elaborate that, all these, the climate sciences, paleosciences, life sciences, archaeology, they try to come back to historians for verification of their data, because they don't deal with the exact dates. They deal with the approximation, and it's the historians who is dealing with the dates, with the clear-cut chronology. So we have to corroborate our evidences, and it's through that corroboration that we are able to use evidences developed in other disciplines for a larger understanding of historical processes, which we term it as a environmental history. The other issue which is important for the environmental history is it has to challenge conventional boundaries, be it temporal divisions, be it spatial boundaries, geographical divisions, cultural and natural. We have to, as an environmental history, we have to challenge these temporal division. Let me share a song with you all that will convey what I'm trying to say. Listen carefully. Yeah, thank you. There are two things very important. Sarhad, Dariya, Pawan ke Jhoke. No boundaries can stop them. And these boundaries are human creation. These are cultural creation. These are political creations. What is interesting for me, this song comes from a film which is titled as Refugees. It's very interesting that the nature has become refugee in the larger understanding of the term. And the second line of the song says that, Socho kya paya humne insa banke. What have we achieved by becoming humans? Which means these boundaries are not natural. These are artificial boundaries, be it national boundaries, this whole notion of nationalism at the moment. We need to go beyond that, especially when we are dealing with the environmental history. So as environmental historians, we have to challenge all these boundaries. We cannot abide by or we cannot work with the ancient, medieval, modern. We try to challenge that, and we have to challenge that. There's no other option with us. For example, when working on my own manuscript, earlier thesis and then manuscript, when I was working on that, in JNU, when I proposed this kind of thesis late in the 1990s, the major concern of the teachers in JNU was that, Mayank, nobody has worked on this. So how to define the temporal frame? And then all of them agreed that let it be as broad as possible. So the title of my PhD dissertation is Environment and Society in Medieval Rajasthan. What do we mean by environment? Is open. What do I mean by society? Is open. And for the time frame, even that is open. It remained medieval India. I mean medieval Rajasthan. We could not confine it to 16th century, 17th century, 15th century, 13th century, because when we were working on that, we realized that certain features of environmental interaction, human nature interactions, cut across these boundaries. And when you, if anybody of you is interested and read my book, then you'll realize that at times I'm using the evidences from the 19th century, British colonial records. I'm using gazetteers extensively. And on the other hand, I'm going back to 7th century, 6th century, and using what Bridget Upadhyay has used as epigraphs. the inscription evidences. So I'm moving between 6th century AD and 19th century AD. So this movement was allowed by JNU because they realized that working on environmental history, we cannot confine ourselves to these temporal boundaries. Similarly, a spatial boundary. I must confess, this is weakness of my dissertation and my book, that I have gone with the modern understanding of Rajasthan. We need to challenge that modern understanding of Rajasthan tremendously, because Rajasthan, if you try to understand Western Rajasthan, you realize that it has much more common with the Sindh than with the other parts of the Rajasthan. Marwar is very different from Mewar and the Dhundhar area. Dhundhar means Jaipur area, Mewar means Udaipur area, and Marwar means Jodhpur area. Jodhpur and Jaisalmer has much more common with the Sindh. This problem of my work was later on rectified by Tanuja Kotial when she worked on the nomadic narratives, and the different kind of work. We'll be discussing that. But the boundaries, these spatial boundaries, are problematic when we are working with the environmental history. These divisions are problematic. I must also say, or rather confess, that the another reason for my inability to venture into Sindh was my inability to read Urdu as well as the Sindhi sources. So I was primarily working with the Rajasthani sources, be it Marwari, be it Mewari. So I could read that, I could work with them, but I was not very comfortable with the Sindhi sources. Neither were they easily available to me. So environmental historians have to go beyond that. These conventional boundaries, they have to challenge. Only then we will be able to get a larger picture. The other thing which I would like to also highlight is the geographical divisions. When I say geographical division, I mean that the agrarian versus forest is a very conventional division, and that creates problem for our understanding. Later on in my presentation, I'll argue that we have moved from agrarian history to environmental history, because the agriculture provides a large chunk of our understanding of nature. But we need to realize that the forest plays a very important role. Not only forest, it's the grassland which also plays a very important role. In our narrative, especially in the modern day, the environmental history of modern India, they have primarily focused on agrarian and forest. They usually ignore the grassland. Recently, Professor Niladri Bhattacharya, a classic text, The Great Agrarian Conquest, where he has tried to move to challenge this duality between agriculture and forest, and he says that pasture land also plays a very, very important role. In other words, the settled agriculturalist and the nomadic, settled agriculturalist and the agro-pastoralist. So these geographical division in terms of this is agrarian landscape, this is pasture landscape, and this is waterscape, or this is forest, we need to challenge them, continuously negate these boundaries. That reminds me of Mahesh Rajan's work. That's an interesting work, though I was not, that was not my intention to cite that work, because that will, it will become too unwindy for me to manage, but let me cite that at this moment of time. Mahesh Rajan, writing on the nature and the Raj. The nature means the nature as the environment, and the Raj means British Raj. Working on that, he has come up, he has put forward a very interesting argument that Britishers had banned use of firearms for the Indian population because they were afraid that it might be used against them. But especially in the Tarai region, when agriculture was to expand, they had to cut the forest. And as they started cutting the forest, they were encountering the wildlife. So there was a proposal from the local administration that anybody who kills a tigress will be given 25 rupees. Kills a tiger will be given 20 rupees. Kills a cub will be given 15 rupees, something like that. And to further enhance their agrarian landscape, they were forced to cut the forest. For that, they awarded not only these benefits or these rewards, but they also allowed Indians to purchase the firearms and to keep the firearms to defend their agrarian landscape, or to defend their peasantry, or to defend their livestock. So the firearms were purchased for the protection or for challenging the wildlife, which is being which is threatening them. I'm not saying that which is encroaching upon them, because we were encroaching forest land. They were not encroaching our land. Rather, we were encroaching the forest land. What MAYANK further argues that this facility of purchasing firearms was used by our nationalists and our the revolutionary activists like that, and they started purchasing firearms from this place and using it for political purposes at other places. So environment was being negotiated, but it was also providing us the glimpses of political negotiations at different levels. So that is what I'm saying, that these conventional boundaries are not tenable when we move into terrain of the environmental history. Let me begin with few of the case studies, because then we'll be showcasing what I'm trying to argue with you all when it comes to the environmental history. And as mentioned earlier, as the title says, that my primary focus on the environmental history of India. Environmental history of India. But to give a backdrop to that, I'll begin with the analysis school, and then we'll move into the specificities of Indian environmental history. Mark block is important. Broadale is very important. And sorry, I have titled in this slide, they have typed double. In the Broadale's name has been typed twice. Just ignore that, please. Ignore that. Mark block, Broadale, and Laduri. Let me begin with the Laduri first, and then I'll come to Mark block and the Broadale later on. Laduris, and let me also say that, and I'm very proud of that, that I was able to meet Laduri in person in a conference in France. He came to deliver the special lecture on history of environment, and fortunately I was there also presenting a paper. So I have been fortunate of meeting Laduri. Emmanuel Laduri, in one of his essay, writes that when this dendrochronology started working, the tree rings were being studied, means the old trees which were 500, 350 years, 500 years old, when they were cut and the tree rings were being studied. The problem with the scientists was that how to exactly figure out that which ring belongs to which year. Because you have got a tree, you don't know the exact age of that tree. So what you are getting is that a rough idea that it belongs to that era, but how to measure that? So they came to the historians. Can you help us? Or can we do anything to exactly corroborate what we are trying to say, that for 350 years back, there was a drought or there was a flood? How to corroborate that? Laduri said, okay, let me try how to figure it out. And what he comes across is a very interesting thing. He goes to the documents available with the church, because church, in medieval times, church used to receive tithe, a kind of tax which peasantry used to deposit with the church. So there was a register was maintained. Every year a register is maintained. The peasant from this area come and they deposit the share of their produce. If the production is good, they'll give a large share. If the production is bad, they'll give a small share. So the evidence from the registers of the religious purposes helps us understand, or Laduri was able to decipher that in a particular year, if the collection is good, which means the weather was good, only then you will get the good production, and then you will give a larger share to the church. And if the production was bad, you will give a less share. There's a possibility you might not be able to give, which means a very, very bad year. He documented this evidence year-wise, chronologically, and then they went back to scientists, and they both sat together to understand in what ways the evidences of dendrochronology or the tree rings are actually reflecting the environmental conditions of that time. So this is how the interaction was taking place between scientists and the historians, and that is why I'm saying it's very interdisciplinary. Insights developed somewhere else were being corroborated by historians. And mind it, historians are not confining only to the political chronicles. They are not only confining to the religious literature, they went to the religious text also to understand the kind of climate we can decipher through these studies. Now let me go back to Broadale, and then we'll go to Mark block, because that will directly take us to Mukhya Saab works. Broadale says that to understand the age of Philip II, we need to understand the Mediterranean. We have to understand Bhumagya, the Mediterranean Sea. In what ways the sea is determining, sorry, I'm using the wrong term. The sea is influencing, or sea is playing very important role in the functioning of those societies. In what ways sea is the center character if you want to understand the historical processes during the age of Philip II. Mind it, please remember that we are talking pre-modern era, because in the pre-modern era, nature was much more dominant for us. At the moment, we have several techniques, we have several technologies through which we bypass the nature. But in the medieval times, in early modern times, the nature had its own say, so we were negotiating with the nature. The same thing which Brothel said for Philip II and Mediterranean cannot be said for the modern times, because the way we negotiate with nature has tremendously changed, and that is why I am not going to deal with the modern times in my lecture, because that's a very different kind of terrain, and I'm not a short lecture will not be able to do justice with that. But remember that these works are focusing on medieval and early modern primarily because the kind of nature and human interaction with that was restricted by the capacity of humans to challenge that. Let me give you another example. Just a second. Let me give you another example. Perhaps that will make you understand what I'm trying to say. A couple of years back, we were going to Leh, and from Leh we were going to Pangong Lake, and the army convoy was leading us. We were behind them, and suddenly there was a landslide, and we stopped. And I got down from my van and went to the ahead and see what has happened. So a big piece of rock has fallen down. Army Jawans, they took out their equipment and they were trying to push it. It was very heavy. Unfortunately, because of the weight of the rock, it was difficult to push it down. Army Jawans were trying their best. The limitation was that not more than 11 soldiers could work together, because then the surface was not available for them to push it. Suddenly, all of them were saying that if we had JCB, that machine which comes and pulls it and throws it down, it would have taken not even a minute. In a second, it would have taken that rock and dropped it in the ditch. But with the human strength, it took almost 45 minutes to push it, and then ultimately they were able to throw it down the ditch. That is what I'm trying to say. Difference between modern and the pre-modern. Anybody who's interested in reading that, please read John McNeill's Something New Under the Sun. John McNeill's Something New Under the Sun, Environmental History of 20th Century. It's an interesting work. And McNeill is a leading environmental historian of our time. It's available online also. If you search, you'll get the soft copy as well. But it's an interesting book to understand the difference. In other words, Analysis School has also dealt with it, and they termed it as a biological regime or ancient regime. The pre-modern age era, they term it as a biological regime or ancient regime. We'll discuss that later on. But at the moment, I'm not going to those details, simply because modern and the issues and technology with the modern has given a different kind of negotiation with the humans. So we're not going to discuss that. Let me focus with the Marx block, because then we'll be able to move to Indian context. Marx block in feudal society went beyond the political understanding of feudalism or the religious understanding of feudalism. And he argued that the feudalism has to be understood in terms of the production relations, in terms of the agrarian production processes, and he examines that. One of the evidence which he cites there, which is very important for us to even briefly mention, that in the early eras of, we are talking about the northwestern Europe. We are not talking about the other parts of Europe. Brothel talks about the primarily northwestern Europe. For northwestern Europe, unlike India, you used to get only one crop a year, not two crops. In India, you usually get a two crops. At times, you get a three crop. So you are getting only one crop because of the limited availability of sun. because of the limited availability of sun in the northwestern Europe. So you are getting only 120 days to do your agriculture. So the production relations are constrained by the environmental factor, the nature, and the natural factor. Because of the technological, the low level of technology, the seed yield ratio in the early eras of the Christmas the Christmas early era of the early centuries of modern era, that is the contemporary era, the seed yield ratio in northwestern Europe was 1:4, 1:2.5, which later on moved to 1:4. 1:2.5 means you sow 1 kg of wheat and you will get 2.5 kg of wheat. Of that 2.5 kg of wheat, you have to retain 1 kg for the next crop. So you are getting only 1.5 kg of wheat. In Indian context, usually you are getting 1:32. 1:32. You sow 1 kg of wheat and you'll get 32 kg. Retain 1 kg, 2 kg, still you have a 30 kg surplus available with you. So the environmental context is very different. So the functioning of feudalism will be different. To further substantiate what I'm trying to say, Nunes, one of the traveler in the early modern times, he says that in the Kaveri Delta, Chennai area, in the Kaveri Delta, the land taken by an elephant is enough. The land which is taken by an elephant to sit is enough to produce crops for the entire family for the entire year. That is the level of productivity in the Kaveri Delta, Kaveri area in the 17th, in the early modern times. Which means the agrarian capacity to produce in Europe, Western Europe in early era is very different from the capacity of agrarian production in Indian context. Mark Bloch was trying to examine the agrarian production system and agrarian relations. In what ways labor is contested there. Because of the limited time, 120 days, you cannot allow your serf, the semi-slave, you cannot allow your serf to work on their own field. That is why they restricted what the kind of crop which serf will cultivate. Because they wanted larger share of labor of that serf on their own field. In Indian context, ruler is least bothered on that. Because whatever you produce, you will get a large amount because the productivity is very high, 1:32. So you will get a very large amount of that. From 17th, 18th century documents from last time where I was, my research area, we have evidence that even if you are producing the fodder, अगर आप जानवर के चारा भी उपजा रहे हैं, if you are producing the fodder, even that fodder is taken by the state, because his state used to say 3 bullock carts or 5 bullock carts of fodder should be deposited with the state, because the state is also maintaining its elephantry, it's maintaining its cavalry, it's maintaining its livestock, so they need fodder for them also. There is no insistence that you produce only the agriculture crop. You produce fodder, we have a requirement of that fodder in our stable, in our areas also. So the production relation in Indian context was very different. This was very clearly understood by Professor Mukhya when he came across with his seminal work, Was There Feudalism in Indian History? And he tried to challenge that the mere availability of different kind of donations of land does not mean that we are encountering or we are going through a phase of feudalism. Feudalism has different characteristic. And then he also examines the level of productivity in India, and then he says that because of the higher production area, a higher production in context, so the pressure on the peasantry was of a different nature. Along with that, but what he doesn't mention, but it's very important for us to realize that we also had at the same time slave mode of the caste system. Unlike slave mode of production, caste system is a psychological domination. A revolutionary like Kabir, he time and again he says that "Hum jati chamara," means I cannot transcend this. I know this is wrong. I know this has to be challenged. I know this has to be modified. But hum jati chamara, I cannot overcome this. I cannot modify this. In feudalism, in slave mode of production, there is always a possibility that you can unfree yourself. or your owner can unfree you, can make you free, go, and you are free. This is not possible in the caste system. So along with the higher agrarian production, where ruler is least interested, what you produce, whatever you produce, will get a share of that, and we have a use of that. And that also reflects in the kind of urbanization we had, the kind of force we have, the kind of palaces we could develop prior to modern period or prior to early modern times. It's a different game because of the ecological conditions in context. So it is the agrarian history which is used by Mukhya Sahab to examine the character of the feudalism, and then he examines the significance of environment in that, the significance of nature in our understanding of the historical processes. And that is where I was influenced, the kind of studies he had done, because I was a student in JNU during my MA. Then we realized that important plays very important role. And as most of you might be aware, that Professor Mukhya had brought at least a few volumes of Indo-French writings. The analysis schools writing were translated in English and were made available to Indian scholars. So there is a movement from agrarian history to environmental history. Scholars like Marc Bloch, Lucien Fabre, Ladouri, Brodel, their work was being translated and made available to Indian scholars. And we were reading them and influence trying to use those technologies or those methodologies to further enhance our understanding of our past. Chetan Singh is a classic example of that. He is one of the earliest historian working on the importance of nature in understanding of historical processes. His text, Natural Premises, Ecology and Peasant Life in Western Himalayas. He tries to examine in what ways the peasant life is governed by the ecological conditions. In what ways it is a regular, continuous negotiation goes on between the environmental conditions and the peasantry. So these negotiations gives us a larger understanding of our nature of environment. So we have moved from agrarian history to environmental history, and then gradually other domains, as I have titled this talk, the widening of environmental history. Now it is widening, moving way beyond agrarian to other dimensions of environment.